He looked calm at first. Just another guest, just another interview. But then Perry Stone leaned forward, lowered his voice, and everything changed. What he revealed about Joni Lamb wasn't scripted, wasn't softened, and it wasn't something anyone expected to hear on live TV. The air went still, the host froze, and for a moment, no one dared breathe. If you think you know the full story behind Daystar, think again, because this bombshell just cracked everything wide open. For years, Joni Lamb was untouchable. She wasn't just a face on Christian television, she was a symbol of faith, family, and quiet strength. Alongside her late husband, Marcus Lamb, she helped build Daystar from the ground up. Together, they turned it into one of the most powerful Christian networks in the world. To millions, Joni was the trusted voice they prayed with, cried with, and believed in. But all of that changed instantly, with one unexpected voice: Perry Stone. No one saw it coming. Perry wasn't a critic or an outsider. He had been part of the same Christian circles for decades. He preached on Daystar, he knew the Lambs, and that made what he said even more explosive. When he went public, it wasn't with vague concerns or quiet questions. It was bold, it was loud, and it hit like a lightning strike. Perry claimed that Joni Lamb wasn't just continuing Marcus's legacy, she was rewriting it. According to him, she had been running Daystar with an iron grip behind the scenes. He said she controlled more than just the schedule. She shaped the message, the preachers who were invited, the topics that were allowed, the worship that made it to air. He said it was all filtered through Joni's personal lens, designed to push her own values, her own voice, and, most shockingly, her own agenda. People froze. At first, they didn't want to believe it. This was Joni Lamb, the woman who prayed on screen, who grieved her husband so openly, who talked about faith like it was her very heartbeat. But Perry wasn't done. He said this wasn't just about control, it was about money too. That Joni used financial leverage to influence who got airtime, who got support, and who got left behind. The more he spoke, the harder it became to ignore. Churches started buzzing. Ministry groups that had partnered with Daystar began asking questions. Longtime viewers scrolled through years of programming in their minds, wondering, had they missed something? Was there always something off? Forums lit up, social media exploded, and Joni, she said nothing. That silence didn't bring peace, it brought doubt. If what Perry was saying wasn't true, why not just deny it? Why not push back? Instead, Joni stayed quiet. She kept appearing on air, smiling like nothing had changed, but everything had. The trust was cracked. And once that crack appeared, it spread quickly. Some defended her immediately. They said Perry had a personal grudge, that he was jealous, that he was stirring division in the body of Christ. But others weren't so sure. After all, this wasn't just another internet rumor. It was a public accusation from someone with deep roots in the same ministry world. The fallout was fast. Ministries started pulling back. Guest speakers declined appearances. People who once shared Daystar videos stopped clicking. Donors began asking for transparency. Staff insiders started leaking stories. The cracks widened into fractures, and soon it was clear this wasn't going away quietly. What began as one man speaking out turned into something bigger than anyone expected. It wasn't just about Joni Lamb anymore. It was about trust, leadership, and what really happens behind the camera. The Christian world was shaken, and for the first time in decades, the name Daystar didn't bring comfort. It brought questions. And no one, not even Joni herself, could put the pieces back together the way they were before. On the surface, Daystar looked like everything it claimed to be: a Christian network spreading faith, hope, and truth. The sets were bright, the hosts smiled, the music soared. It looked polished, professional, and peaceful. But behind the scenes, there was another reality forming, one that very few ever saw. And at the center of that unseen world was Joni Lamb. When Marcus Lamb passed away, many assumed Joni would step back or simply serve as a figurehead while others took the reins. After all, she had always been seen as the soft-spoken partner in the background, the faithful wife who supported her husband's ministry. But that assumption didn't hold, because what became clear over time was that Joni had quietly taken full control, not just of the brand, but of the decisions, the influence, and the direction of everything Daystar stood for. It started slowly. Insiders began to notice changes. Preachers who had once been regular guests were no longer being invited back. Certain messages that challenged leadership, focused too much on humility, or dared to call out power structures quietly disappeared from the schedule. In their place were programs that felt safe, aligned, and controlled. It wasn't random. It was personal. Joni had started reshaping the content, not around the gospel, but around what she wanted Daystar to be. She wasn't loud about it. That's what made it so effective. It wasn't a takeover. It was a transformation, done in silence. No memos, no public declarations, just quiet influence behind closed doors. According to multiple former staff members and ministers, Joni kept a very small circle of trusted voices. If you were in, you stayed. If you challenged her, even once, you were pushed out. Not with drama, not with arguments, just erased. One preacher recalled being told he was on hold for future programming and never heard from again. Another said he was subtly encouraged to avoid certain topics that made higher-ups uncomfortable. Over time, more and more voices disappeared. What remained were those who followed the unspoken rules. Keep the message light, keep Joni happy, and never step out of line. Then there was the money. Daystar wasn't just a media platform, it was a financial powerhouse. Millions flowed in from donors every year, money given in good faith by people who believed in the mission. But according to sources close to the operation, that money also gave Joni immense power. She could decide who got airtime, who got support, and who didn't, all with the stroke of a pen. Ministries that aligned with her views, promoted and celebrated. Those that didn't, quietly pushed aside. Some insiders even claimed she used donations and access to funding to shape ministries beyond Daystar. There were whispers of thank you money being given to friendly pastors, of behind-the-scenes deals that helped keep her allies loyal and her critics quiet. None of it was illegal on the surface, but it painted a troubling picture, one where money wasn't just used for ministry, but for control. Joni also had powerful friends. Politicians, business leaders, and high-profile pastors were part of her world. These weren't casual acquaintances. These were long-standing relationships, forged over decades. She knew how to play the game, when to speak, when to stay silent, and who to lean on when things got tough. That network helped keep questions at bay and created a protective bubble that made Joni look untouchable. But not everyone stayed quiet. Over the years, a few brave voices started to speak out, some publicly, some behind the scenes. They didn't all agree on the details, but their stories shared common themes. Joni was in charge. She didn't tolerate disagreement. And Daystar wasn't as open or pure as it appeared. What made it all so chilling was how carefully it had been hidden. There was no shouting, no scandals, just a soft, methodical consolidation of power. The messages preached on air were filtered. The guests were curated. Even the worship music, some said, was chosen with intention, not to stir the spirit, but to keep things in line. And Joni? She remained calm, poised, unbothered. As the network grew and expanded, she rarely addressed the deeper concerns. When whispers became louder, she didn't deny them. She didn't confirm them either. She simply kept moving, kept smiling, kept speaking on faith and grace, while behind the curtain, everything was tightly controlled. Former staff members described the workplace as tense. Some said it felt like walking on eggshells. One wrong look, one offhand comment, one mistake, and you could be out. It wasn't just about performance, it was about loyalty. And loyalty to Joni, specifically. For many viewers and donors, it took Perry Stone's public accusations to finally see the bigger picture. His words cracked open the polished surface. Suddenly, all the quiet rumors, the little red flags, they rushed into focus. People started re-watching old broadcasts with new eyes. They saw how often certain voices were missing, how safe and scripted everything felt. And it all led to one question. Was this still a ministry, or had it become something else? The silence from Joni in the middle of all this only deepened the divide. Supporters said she was choosing grace, refusing to fight back against gossip. Critics said she was hiding, avoiding the truth. Either way, her quiet control continued. No interviews, no rebuttals, just business as usual, as if none of it mattered. But it did matter. It mattered to the pastors who felt silenced, to the viewers who felt betrayed, to the employees who had watched their workplace turn from a mission into a machine. And it mattered to the people who had trusted Daystar with their money, their prayers, and their faith. Behind the curtain wasn't just a metaphor. It was a reality, one that many are only now beginning to see clearly. Influence, money, and silent control had shaped Daystar for years. And Joni Lamb, the soft-spoken woman at the center of it all, wasn't just along for the ride. She was driving. When Perry Stone dropped his bombshell about Joni Lamb, no one could have predicted the storm that would follow. It didn't stay contained to Daystar's studio walls or the usual online gossip threads. It exploded across churches, homes, and entire faith communities. What began as a scandal soon became a spiritual earthquake, and at the center of it all was one woman whose silence spoke louder than any sermon. The Christian community is no stranger to controversy. We've all seen leaders fall, ministries implode, and reputations get dragged through the mud. But this was different. Joni Lamb wasn't just a leader, she was a symbol. For decades, she had been welcomed into living rooms as a trusted face of faith. People prayed with her, cried with her, and saw her as someone walking in grace. That's why the betrayal felt so personal. The moment Perry Stone's words hit the airwaves, the emotional floodgates burst open. People didn't just react, they unraveled. In small Bible studies, people whispered, "Did you hear what he said?" In Facebook groups and Christian forums, posts poured in, some in defense of Joni, others in disbelief. And in churches across the country, pastors suddenly found themselves trying to hold their flocks together as arguments broke out in pews and prayer circles. It was heartbreaking to watch. Congregations that had once stood united in worship were now divided by doubt. Some members refused to believe a word of it. "Not Joni," they said. "She's always been faithful, always stood for truth." Others weren't so sure. They saw the silence, the shifting programming, the growing control, and they began to wonder if the rumors were just the tip of something deeper. The crisis didn't just divide opinions. It cracked open wounds. People who had given money to Daystar felt duped. They had believed they were funding ministry, not manipulation. Volunteers who had proudly represented the network now felt embarrassed, even ashamed. Some shared their hurt in online confessionals, talking about how hard it was to reconcile their love for the ministry with the feeling of being misled. Joni's silence only added fuel to the fire. She didn't make a statement. She didn't appear on air to set the record straight. She just kept going like nothing had happened. That decision, whether it was based on legal advice, spiritual conviction, or stubborn pride, hit hard. For many people, the lack of a response was the response. It made the doubts feel more real. It made the betrayal sting even more. And then came the sermons. Across churches, pastors had no choice but to address the elephant in the room. Some took a cautious route, reminding their congregations that no one is perfect and that grace is still the heartbeat of faith. Others went further, calling out the dangers of unchecked power, of platforms that grow too big to be questioned. They warned against celebrity culture in the church, where ministries start to look more like empires. But even with these efforts, the damage had been done. People were angry. People were hurt. And more than anything, people were confused. For years, Daystar had been a spiritual lifeline, a place where they found hope during illness, clarity during confusion, and strength during grief. Now, they weren't sure if any of it had been real. That doubt seeped into everything. Was the worship sincere? Were the prayers authentic? Were the words from God, or from someone with a script and a strategy? That kind of questioning doesn't just shake faith in a network. It shakes faith, period. And for many, that's exactly what happened. Some walked away from Daystar completely, vowing never to watch again. Others clung even tighter, convinced this was just spiritual warfare, meant to destroy a righteous woman. But most people fell somewhere in between, caught in a web of disbelief and disappointment, trying to sort out the truth from the noise. Churches started losing members, not because of theological differences, but because of broken trust. Longtime friends stopped speaking. Bible study groups fell apart. It became harder to pray when the person you once trusted most now felt like a stranger. And pastors, they were exhausted, not just from the debates, but from the emotional weight of watching their communities fracture over something they had no control over. The crisis of faith wasn't just about Joni Lamb. It was about what she represented. She was supposed to be a voice of integrity in a noisy, chaotic world. When that voice was accused of deception and manipulation, it wasn't just a leadership issue. It was personal. People felt like they had been spiritually gaslighted. And that kind of hurt doesn't go away easily. Christian influencers, YouTubers, and podcasters took sides. Some doubled down on defending Joni, analyzing Perry Stone's motives and questioning his credibility. Others dug into Daystar's past, pulling up clips, timelines, and suspicious patterns. Suddenly, the internet was filled with evidence, theories, timelines, and testimonies, all pointing in different directions. And all the while, the silence from Joni remained. This wasn't just a public breakdown of a ministry. It was a breakdown of trust, unity, and peace. It was a spiritual wound, deep and raw, that forced people to confront uncomfortable questions. Questions like, what happens when a leader we trust loses their way? Can faith survive betrayal? And is there a way forward when the damage feels this big? Some churches tried to bring healing. They held prayer nights, not for Joni or Perry, but for the people who had been hurt. They opened their altars for those who needed to cry, vent, or just sit in silence. They reminded their members that God is bigger than any scandal, and that even when leaders fall, faith can still stand. But rebuilding that trust? It's going to take time. For some, it may never come back. This wasn't just a controversy. It was a reckoning. A reminder that when Christian platforms become too powerful, too polished, and too protected, they lose the very thing they were meant to carry: authenticity. And for millions of believers, that realization was more painful than anything Perry Stone could have said. Daystar, Joni Lamb, and the people around her may eventually issue statements. They may apologize, they may deny, they may even rebuild. But the ripple effect of this scandal has already changed the Christian landscape. The public breakdown, the divided churches, and the crisis of faith it created will be felt for years to come. What started as whispers about Joni Lamb quickly turned into a firestorm. But the deeper shock came later. As the days turned into weeks and the backlash refused to die down, something even bigger began to unfold. This wasn't just a scandal. It wasn't just about one woman's choices or Perry Stone's explosive claims. It became something else entirely, a full-blown unraveling of the Christian media world as people had known it. At first, the reaction had been centered on Joni. The accusations of financial manipulation, power plays, and spiritual control hit like a wrecking ball. But as viewers, pastors, and insiders began digging deeper, they found the cracks didn't stop at her feet. They ran through the very foundation of Daystar and extended far beyond it. What once looked like a single controversy slowly revealed itself as a symptom of a much larger sickness. Daystar had always stood as one of the most powerful Christian media outlets in the world. It wasn't just a channel, it was an empire. Millions of viewers, massive donations, access to politicians, celebrities, and religious figures. But when the trust in its leadership broke, people started asking, how did it get this bad without anyone noticing? And the answer wasn't simple or easy to accept. People began talking. Former employees, church leaders, and Christian artists shared what they'd seen behind the scenes, not just at Daystar, but across other ministries too. Stories of backroom deals, ministries prioritizing ratings over truth, and platforms that were supposed to lift up the Word of God instead becoming mouthpieces for whoever held the purse strings. It became clear Daystar wasn't the only place where power had gone unchecked. It had become a pattern in the industry. When Christian networks began functioning more like corporations, focused on revenue, control, and influence, something vital was lost. The scandal with Joni Lamb just happened to be the match that lit the fuse. For years, ministries had operated with little to no transparency. Donors gave, hoping their money went to missions or broadcasts, but few ever saw where the funds ended up. Celebrity pastors were praised on air, but privately, there were whispers of lavish spending, inflated salaries, and ego-driven leadership. Now that the curtain was pulled back, people saw it for what it was, and they were furious. Churches that once played Daystar on big screens during services stopped overnight. Congregations voted to end financial support. Pastors issued public apologies for ever promoting the network. Bible study groups shifted focus from the gospel to how easily it had been packaged, sold, and manipulated on screen. And then, one by one, other names started coming up. Other Christian media figures who had long avoided scrutiny suddenly found themselves under a microscope. Accusations began to surface, some financial, some moral, some simply about unchecked pride. Viewers no longer gave the benefit of the doubt. They asked for receipts, proof, transparency. The blind faith was gone. The spiritual fallout was even worse. People who had come to Christ through these broadcasts were left questioning everything. Was their faith real? Had they been lied to? Did God really speak through these leaders? Or were they just watching performances all along? For many, it created a spiritual identity crisis. They felt disoriented, angry, even betrayed by a system that had claimed to speak for God. What hurt most was how long it had all been allowed to happen. The warning signs had been there. Leaders growing too powerful, ministries growing too rich, messages growing too polished. But no one spoke up. Or if they did, they were silenced, pushed aside, or painted as bitter and disloyal. Now, those silenced voices were being heard, and people were finally listening. Blue Reno had once finally listened. Inside Daystar, the collapse wasn't just public. It was internal. Staff began resigning, leadership meetings turned tense, longtime employees who once kept quiet now questioned everything. Rumors of investigations, audits, and lawsuits swirled. It was no longer a matter of image management. It was about survival. And the more Joni stayed silent, the more that survival seemed unlikely. But even as Daystar struggled, the collapse went further. Sponsors began pulling out from similar networks. Ministries rushed to issue public statements affirming their financial transparency and ethical standards. Some even brought in third-party audits to avoid being lumped in with the growing scandal. It was damage control, fast, loud, and desperate. In the middle of it all, a reckoning began, not just for networks or leaders, but for viewers. People started asking hard questions about who they followed, who they trusted, and why. They looked in the mirror and admitted that maybe they had been too eager to believe, too comfortable with convenience, too quick to worship personalities instead of truth.